"You don't belong in first class." Those 5 words, spoken with barely concealed contempt by flight attendant Carol Henderson, were about to cost her everything. Because the black woman she was trying to remove from seat 2A wasn't just a passenger. She was Michelle Williams, and she owned the entire airline. This is a story about assumptions, prejudice, and the moment when power reveals itself in the most unexpected way. It's about 6 months of silent observation, 18 years of unchecked bias, and one flight that would change everything. Stay with me, because what happens at 35,000 feet is about to ground more than just an aircraft. The sun was just beginning to burn through the morning haze at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, the busiest airport in the world. Terminal T hummed with its usual chaotic energy. Business travelers power walking with roller bags, families herding children toward security checkpoints, the constant drone of CNN playing on overhead monitors. At gate T14, the early morning flight to Los Angeles was beginning its boarding process. Skyrise Airlines Flight 418 scheduled departure 7:30 a.m. A routine cross-country flight that thousands of people took every week. Nothing special, nothing remarkable, just another Tuesday. Michelle Williams stood near the gate, away from the main crowd, observing. She wore a simple navy blue pantsuit, professional but understated. The jacket had long sleeves that covered her arms completely, and the matching pants fell to sensible black flats. A cream-colored silk scarf was draped loosely around her neck, covering her chest and collarbone. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat low bun. She wore no jewelry except a simple silver watch and small stud earrings. Everything about her appearance was intentional, modest, professional, and deliberately unremarkable. At 43 years old, Michelle Williams was the founder and CEO of Skyrise Airlines. She'd started the company 12 years ago with 2 planes and a dream of creating an airline that valued both safety and dignity. Today, Skyrise operated 147 aircraft, employed over 8,000 people, and was valued at $2.3 billion. She'd built it from nothing, through loans she'd barely qualified for, through investors who dismissed her, through an industry that had never seen a black woman at the helm of a major carrier. But for the past 6 months, Michelle had been invisible in her own company. No announcements to the staff, no executive perks, no special treatment. She'd been flying as a regular passenger, using a credit card under a slightly different name, M. Williams instead of Michelle A. Williams, booking tickets like any other traveler, sometimes economy, sometimes business class, and for the past 3 weeks exclusively first class. She was documenting, building a case, learning the truth about how her airline really treated its passengers when they thought no one important was watching. The things she'd seen had broken her heart. The subtle looks her black and brown passengers received, the extra scrutiny, the assumptions, the way security was called more quickly, the way complaints were dismissed, the way her own carefully crafted diversity policies existed beautifully on paper and died quietly in practice. Today was different, though. Today was the culmination of everything she'd observed. Because the flight attendant working this route, Carol Henderson, had appeared in Michelle's reports more than any other employee. 3 separate incidents in the past 4 months, all involving black passengers, all dismissed by management as misunderstandings or communication issues. Michelle had read Carol's personnel file. 18 years with Skyrise and its predecessor airlines. Excellent technical skills, always on time, good safety record. But buried in the file were complaints, so many complaints. Passengers describing her as cold, dismissive, rude. And when Michelle had cross-referenced the complaint data by passenger demographics, a pattern emerged. 83% of complaints about Carol Henderson came from passengers of color. Management had never noticed the pattern, or perhaps they'd chosen not to notice. Today, Michelle was going to make it impossible to ignore. The gate agent, a young man named Marcus who'd been with Skyrise for only 6 months, made the boarding announcement. Good morning, passengers. We'll now begin boarding Skyrise Airlines Flight 418 to Los Angeles. At this time, we'd like to invite our first-class passengers and Skyrise Elite members to board. Michelle picked up her small carry-on bag, a simple black leather tote, and walked to the gate. Marcus scanned her boarding pass with a cheerful smile. Good morning, Miss Williams. Seat 2A. Have a great flight. Thank you, Michelle replied, her voice warm but not overly friendly. She'd learned over the months that being too memorable defeated the purpose of her observations. She walked down the jet bridge, her footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. Through the windows, she could see the Boeing 737 that would take her across the country. The morning light glinted off its white fuselage, the distinctive teal stripe of Skyrise's livery running along its length. Her airline, her planes, her dream made metal and wings. At the aircraft door, she was greeted by a male flight attendant in his 30s. His name tag read James. He smiled warmly. Good morning, welcome aboard. Good morning, Michelle replied, stepping into the aircraft. And there, standing in the first-class galley arranging service items, was Carol Henderson. Carol was a white woman in her early 50s, with short blonde hair styled in a practical cut. She wore the standard Skyrise flight attendant uniform, a teal jacket and skirt, white blouse, sensible heels. Her makeup was precise, her bearing professional. She looked exactly like what she was, a veteran flight attendant who'd done this job thousands of times. When Carol looked up and saw Michelle entering first class, something flickered across her face. It was subtle, so subtle that most people wouldn't have caught it. But Michelle had been watching for these micro-expressions for months now. She recognized it immediately. Surprise, followed quickly by assessment, followed by a tightening around the eyes and mouth that Michelle had come to understand meant one thing. This passenger doesn't belong here. Michelle walked calmly to row 2, window seat. She placed her tote in the overhead bin and settled into her seat. The first-class cabin was configured with only 12 seats, 3 rows of 4 with generous spacing. The seats were cream-colored leather, wider than economy, with built-in entertainment screens and power outlets. Through the window, she could see ground crew loading bags into the cargo hold. Her airline, her planes, her dream made metal and wings. At the aircraft door, she was greeted by a male flight attendant in his 30s. His name tag read James. He smiled warmly. Good morning, welcome aboard. Good morning, Michelle replied, stepping into the aircraft. And there, standing in the first-class galley arranging service items, was Carol Henderson. Carol was a white woman in her early 50s with short blonde hair styled in a practical cut. She wore the standard Skyrise flight attendant uniform, a teal jacket and skirt, white blouse, sensible heels. Her makeup was precise, her bearing professional. She looked exactly like what she was, a veteran flight attendant who'd done this job thousands of times. When Carol looked up and saw Michelle entering first class, something flickered across her face. It was subtle, so subtle that most people wouldn't have caught it. But Michelle had been watching for these micro-expressions for months now. She recognized it immediately. Surprise, followed quickly by assessment, followed by a tightening around the eyes and mouth that Michelle had come to understand meant one thing. This passenger doesn't belong here. Michelle walked calmly to row 2, window seat. She placed her tote in the overhead bin and settled into her seat. The first-class cabin was configured with only 12 seats, 3 rows of 4 with generous spacing. The seats were cream-colored leather, wider than economy, with built-in entertainment screens and power outlets. Through the window, she could see ground crew loading bags into the cargo hold. She pulled out her phone and opened what appeared to be a standard note-taking app. In reality, it was a secure recording application that documented everything: audio, timestamps, even her GPS location. She pressed record and slipped the phone into the seat pocket in front of her, positioned so its microphone would capture everything. Carol appeared in the aisle beside her. Her smile was professional but didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, ma'am." "Good morning," Michelle replied, meeting her gaze directly. "I'll need to see your boarding pass," Carol said. Michelle reached into her jacket pocket and handed it over. This was normal procedure. Flight attendants often verify passengers in first class, though usually they just glanced at the passes rather than studying them. Carol looked at the boarding pass, then at Michelle, then back at the pass. She studied it for several seconds longer than necessary. "Ms. Williams," she said, her tone shifting slightly, "this boarding pass shows seat 2A, first class." "Yes," Michelle said simply. "Did you purchase this ticket yourself?" The question landed in the cabin like a stone. It was subtle enough that Carol could claim innocence. She was just verifying, just doing her job, but both women knew what she was really asking. "Yes, I did," Michelle replied, her voice calm. Carol's lips pressed together in a thin line. "I'm going to need to verify this ticket with the gate. Sometimes there are issues with upgrades or—" "There was no upgrade," Michelle interrupted gently. "I purchased this ticket 3 weeks ago, direct purchase, full fare. Still, I'd like to verify." "Is there a specific problem with my boarding pass?" Michelle asked, her tone still pleasant but with an edge of steel underneath. Other passengers were beginning to board now. A white man in an expensive suit walked past them and took seat 1A without Carol giving him a second glance. Behind him, a white woman with designer luggage settled into 1C. Carol smiled at both of them, welcomed them aboard, offered them champagne. She did not offer Michelle champagne. Instead, Carol leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. "Ma'am, I need to be direct with you. First-class seats on this route are quite expensive. We've had issues in the past with passengers who've somehow obtained boarding passes for seats they haven't properly paid for. I'm not accusing you of anything, but I do need to verify this with the gate before we can proceed." Michelle felt the familiar weight of it, the exhaustion that came from being questioned, doubted, suspected in situations where her white counterparts were simply welcomed. She'd felt it in boutique stores where security followed her. She'd felt it in corporate boardrooms where people assumed she was the assistant rather than the CEO. She'd felt it in first-class cabins on other airlines before she'd built her own. And now she was feeling it on her own airline. Despite her policies, despite her training programs, despite everything she tried to build. The man in seat 1A glanced over, his expression uncomfortable. He was watching. Other passengers filing into economy class were slowing down, sensing the tension, trying to figure out what was happening. Michelle took a slow breath. She could end this right now. She could pull out her CEO credentials. She could explain who she was. But that would defeat the purpose of everything she'd been documenting. If she revealed herself now, Carol would claim she had no idea, that this was all a misunderstanding, that she would never have acted this way if she'd known she was speaking to the CEO. Michelle needed to see how far this would go. She needed Carol to show exactly who she was when she thought there were no consequences. "You don't need to verify anything," Michelle said calmly. "My ticket is valid. I'm sitting in my assigned seat. If there's a technical issue with your system, that's something for you to resolve, but it doesn't require me to move or prove anything beyond the boarding pass I've already shown you." Carol's face flushed slightly. She wasn't used to being challenged. "Ma'am, I'm trying to be polite here, but you're making this difficult. I have the authority to determine seating in this cabin, and I'm asking you to cooperate." "I am cooperating," Michelle replied. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat." The male flight attendant, James, approached nervously. "Carol, is everything okay? Do you need—" "It's fine, James," Carol said sharply, not taking her eyes off Michelle. "I'm handling it." But James didn't move away. He glanced at Michelle, at the boarding pass still in Carol's hand, and his expression showed confusion. Michelle recognized him from previous flights. He'd been professional, kind to all passengers regardless of race. He was one of the good ones. "Carol," James said quietly, "her boarding pass looks valid. Maybe we should just—" "James, please attend to the other passengers," Carol snapped. An older black couple boarded, 70s, well-dressed, moving slowly. They had first-class boarding passes. Carol barely glanced at theirs, but Michelle saw the micro-expression again, the subtle assessment, the brief hesitation before welcoming them. They took seats in row 3. The woman caught Michelle's eye, and there was a moment of recognition between them, not of identity, but of shared experience. The look said, "I see what's happening to you. I've lived it too." Carol returned her attention to Michelle. Her voice was no longer attempting politeness. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time. I need to verify this ticket, and I need you to step out of the seat while I do so. You can wait in the galley area." "No," Michelle said simply. The word hung in the air. "Excuse me?" Carol's voice pitched higher. "I said no. I'm not moving from my assigned seat based on your unsubstantiated concerns about a valid boarding pass." Carol's face went rigid. "Ma'am, if you refuse to follow crew instructions, that's grounds for removal from the aircraft. I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling you. You don't belong in first class. Move to the galley area now, or I'm calling security." There it was, the words Michelle had been waiting for. "You don't belong in first class." Said with absolute certainty. Said with the unshakable conviction that Carol Henderson knew who belonged in premium cabins and who didn't. And Michelle Williams, a black woman in modest clothing, definitely didn't belong. The cabin had gone completely silent. All pretense of privacy was gone. Every passenger in first class was watching now. Some had their phones out, recording. Michelle looked Carol directly in the eyes. "I need you to repeat what you just said." Carol faltered for just a moment, perhaps realizing she'd said the quiet part out loud. But then her defensiveness kicked in. "I said you don't belong in first class. This cabin is for passengers who have properly purchased premium tickets, and I have serious doubts about your ticket. Now I'm calling security." She turned toward the aircraft phone near the galley. "James, please, attend to the captain before—" "The captain will support me," Carol said. "He always does." Michelle remained perfectly still in her seat, hands folded in her lap. She appeared calm, but her heart was pounding. Not with fear, with the righteous anger she'd been carrying for 6 months. The anger for every black passenger who'd been treated like a suspect in their own seat. The anger for every person of color who'd been made to feel they didn't belong in spaces they'd paid for, worked for, earned. Carol picked up the phone and pressed a button. "Captain Morrison, this is Carol. I need security at gate T14. I have a passenger refusing crew instructions, and I need her removed from first class. Yes, refusing to comply. Yes, I've asked multiple times. Thank you." She hung up and turned back to Michelle with a look of smug satisfaction. Security is on their way. You have one more chance to move voluntarily, or they'll escort you off this aircraft. The man in seat 1A spoke up. "Excuse me, but I don't think—" "Sir, please don't interfere," Carol snapped at him. "I'm not interfering, but I've been sitting here the whole time, and this woman has done nothing wrong. She showed you a valid boarding pass and sat in her assigned seat. You're the one creating a problem. Sir, I will have you removed as well if you continue. You'll have me removed for pointing out that you're harassing a passenger?" The man pulled out his phone. "Because I'm recording this too, and my company's lawyers are very good." Carol's face was now bright red. She was losing control of the situation, and she knew it. The cockpit door opened and Captain David Morrison stepped out. He was a white man in his late 50s, silver-haired, wearing the crisp Navy uniform of a skyrise captain with 4 gold stripes on his shoulders. He had the confident bearing of someone who'd been flying for 30 years. Michelle had reviewed his file too. Solid pilot, good safety record. But there were notes in his HR folder about old-school management style and resistance to new diversity training protocols. "What's the situation?" Morrison asked Carol. "Captain, I have a passenger in first class whose ticket I cannot verify. She's refusing to cooperate with my verification process and refusing to move from the seat while I confirm her purchase. She's being disruptive and non-compliant." Morrison looked at Michelle. She saw his eyes take in her appearance, making the same calculations Carol had made. Black woman, modest clothing, first-class seat. His expression hardened. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a captain, Federal aviation regulations give the pilot in command final authority over passenger seating and conduct. If my flight attendant has a concern about your ticket, you are required to comply with her instructions. I'm ordering you to leave that seat immediately and exit the aircraft until this is resolved." Michelle looked up at him. "Captain, I have done nothing wrong. I have a valid boarding pass. I have not been disruptive. The only disruption has been caused by your flight attendant's unfounded suspicion of a ticket she has no legitimate reason to question." "That's not for you to determine," Morrison said coldly. "Security is on their way. You can walk off this plane with dignity, or you can be escorted off. Your choice." James, the junior flight attendant, looked like he wanted to say something but was clearly afraid to contradict his captain. The elderly black woman in row 3 spoke up, her voice trembling but firm. "This is wrong. I'm watching this young woman be treated like a criminal for sitting in a seat she paid for. Because she's black. That's what this is about. Ma'am, please stay out of this." "I will not stay out of it. I've been flying for 50 years, and I've seen this happen too many times. You should be ashamed." Michelle saw the older woman's husband squeeze her hand, pride and worry mingling on his face. 2 airport security officers appeared at the aircraft door, summoned by Carol's call. They were both white men, middle-aged, with the wary expressions of people who dealt with too many messy situations at 35,000 feet and 0 altitude. "What's the situation?" the first officer asked. "We have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions," Morrison said, gesturing to Michelle. "She needs to be removed from the aircraft for ticket verification." The security officer walked to row 2. He looked at Michelle, then at Morrison, then at Carol. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us." Michelle remained seated. She spoke clearly, knowing multiple people were recording. "I'm asking for documentation of why I'm being removed. I have shown a valid boarding pass. I have committed no violation. I'm being removed based solely on a flight attendant's unsubstantiated suspicion. Ma'am, the captain has authority over seating. We're just doing our job. And I'm asking you to document that this removal is happening despite no violation, no disruption, and no invalid documentation on my part." The officer shifted uncomfortably. He could sense something was off about this situation, but his job was to back up the crew. "Ma'am, are you going to come voluntarily?" Michelle looked around the cabin. She saw the man in 1A recording on his phone. She saw James looking distressed. She saw the elderly couple holding hands. She saw other passengers in economy, peering in, watching this black woman being removed from first class. She thought about every person who'd sat in this same seat, on this same airline, and experienced this same humiliation. She thought about the policies she'd written, the training she'd mandated, the culture she'd tried to build. And she thought about how utterly it had failed. It was time. Michelle reached into her jacket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. She opened it and held it up so the security officers, Carol, Morrison, and all the recording phones could see it clearly. It was her CEO identification card for Skyrise Airlines, complete with her photo, her title, and the company seal. The reaction was instantaneous. Carol's face went from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Captain Morrison froze mid-gesture, his hand still outstretched toward Michelle, his expression shifting from authority to horror as his brain processed what he was seeing. The security officers actually took a step backward. James, the junior flight attendant, gasped audibly. And throughout the cabin, there was a collective intake of breath as passengers realized they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. Michelle stood up slowly, with the quiet dignity of someone who'd been in control of this situation from the very beginning. She was taller than Carol, and at this moment, she seemed even taller. Not from physical height, but from the sheer force of authority she carried. Carol had her spot. Carol Henderson, Michelle said, her voice calm but carrying through the entire cabin. I am Michelle Williams, founder and chief executive officer of Skyrise Airlines. For the past 6 months, I have been flying on my own airline as a regular passenger, documenting the treatment of passengers of color. You are the 7th employee I've observed engaging in discriminatory behavior. But you are the first to be so blatant, so cruel, and so absolutely certain that you could treat a black woman like a criminal simply for sitting in a seat she purchased. Carol tried to speak. I didn't. I had no idea. That's exactly the point. Michelle cut her off. You had no idea who I was. So you felt completely comfortable questioning my ticket, demanding I prove I could afford my seat, and ordering my removal from the aircraft. You never questioned the white passengers in first class. You didn't ask them for proof of purchase. You didn't call security on them. Just me. Just the black woman. She turned to Captain Morrison, who looked like he might be sick. Captain Morrison, you just ordered your CEO removed from an aircraft for the crime of sitting while black. You backed up discriminatory behavior without investigating the situation. You used your authority to enforce prejudice. Morrison's mouth worked soundlessly. Michelle addressed the security officers. Gentlemen, thank you for responding to the call. Your services are not needed. However, I will need you to file a report documenting everything you witnessed here today. She looked at James. You tried to stop this. I saw that. Thank you. Then she looked at the elderly black woman in row 3, who had tears streaming down her face. Ma'am, thank you for speaking up. It shouldn't be your burden to speak up against injustice, but you did anyway. I'm sorry you had to witness this. Finally, Michelle turned back to Carol. You're fired, effective immediately. You will be escorted from this aircraft by security. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Skyrise Airlines does not employ people who treat passengers like criminals based on the color of their skin. Please, Carol whispered, her voice breaking. I have 18 years. I didn't mean. I wasn't trying to. Yes, you were, Michelle said firmly. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was a choice you've made repeatedly according to the complaint record I've reviewed. Today was just the first time there were consequences. She turned to Morrison. Captain, you're grounded pending an investigation. A replacement captain will be assigned to this flight. You're to surrender your flight credentials to the gate agent and report to the main office by end of business today. Morrison found his voice. Miss Williams, I apologize. I was supporting my crew. I didn't realize. You didn't realize that supporting your crew might mean questioning their judgment when they're clearly in the wrong? You didn't realize that blind support of discriminatory behavior makes you complicit? Captain, you have 30 years of experience. Use some of it to reflect on what just happened here. Michelle addressed the entire first-class cabin, her voice carrying to the economy passengers watching from beyond the curtain. To all of you who witnessed this, I apologize on behalf of Skyrise Airlines. This is not who we are. This is not who we're going to be. Real change starts with accountability. Today, you saw accountability. She turned to the security officers. Please, escort Miss Henderson from the aircraft. As Carol was led away, she was crying openly, her 18-year career ending in shame and regret. But Michelle felt no satisfaction in it, only sadness that it had come to this, that the policy she'd written, the training she'd mandated, the culture she tried to build, none of it had been enough to stop what just happened. The entire cabin was silent as Michelle returned to her seat in 2A. She pulled out her phone from the seat pocket, stopped the recording, and saved it to her secure cloud storage. James approached hesitantly. Miss Williams, I'm so sorry. I tried to tell her. You did what you could in a difficult position, Michelle said gently. That took courage. Thank you. What happens to the flight now? The flight will continue to Los Angeles as scheduled. I'll personally oversee a replacement captain. Tell the gate agent to make an announcement, departing approximately 30 minutes late due to crew change. James nodded and hurried to the phone. Michelle sat in the silence that followed, looking out the window at the airport operations continuing their normal rhythm. Somewhere in this airport, Carol Henderson was being escorted to the parking lot, her career over. Captain Morrison was being relieved of his flight, and Michelle was sitting in the seat where it all began. The man in 1A stood up and approached her. He extended his hand. "Ma'am, I'm Robert Chin. I want to thank you for standing up to them and for not backing down even when they threatened you." Michelle shook his hand. "Thank you for speaking up. Not enough people do. I'm ashamed I almost didn't. I almost told myself it wasn't my business." He looked down. "I'm glad I found my courage." The elderly black woman from row 3 came forward, tears still on her cheeks. "Baby, you were magnificent, simply magnificent. You reminded me why we keep fighting." Michelle stood and embraced her gently. "What's your name?" "Dorothy Jenkins. This is my husband, William. We're going to Los Angeles for our granddaughter's graduation." "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Jenkins. Your granddaughter is lucky to have you." "We've been watching the civil rights movement unfold all our lives," Dorothy said. "From the back of the bus to a black woman owning an airline. Times change. But what happened here today," she gestured to the now empty galley where Carol had stood, "that shows we still have so far to go." "We do," agreed. "But we'll get there. One confrontation at a time. One policy change at a time. One person at a time." As passengers began to settle in for the delayed departure, Michelle's phone buzzed. A text from her VP of Operations, who she'd briefed about today's potential situation. "I'm watching the videos. They're already going viral. You okay?" Michelle typed back, "I'm okay. Initiate company-wide review protocol. This is bigger than one flight attendant and one captain." Another text from her friend and mentor, a woman who'd guided her through the early days of building Skyrise. "That took incredible strength. Now comes the hard part, following through on the promise you just made to those passengers." Michelle knew she was right. Today wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of the real work. A replacement captain arrived, a black woman named Patricia Hall, one of Skyrise's most experienced pilots. Patricia boarded the aircraft, assessed the situation with a quick briefing from James, and approached Michelle's seat. "Miss Williams," Patricia said quietly, "I heard what happened. I'm honored to fly this route today." "Thank you, Captain Hall." "And, Patricia," Michelle caught her eye, "this is exactly why representation matters. Everyone on this plane now sees a black woman captain taking command after a white captain was relieved for supporting discrimination. That visual matters." Patricia nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. As the pre-flight preparations continued with a new crew dynamic, as passengers settled in with their phones still buzzing with the viral videos of the confrontation, as the morning sun climbed higher over Atlanta, Michelle Williams sat in seat 2A and prepared for a flight that would change her airline forever. But she wasn't just preparing for the flight to Los Angeles. She was preparing for the storm that would follow. The media attention, the internal investigations, the painful process of reforming a company culture that had failed so fundamentally. Carol Henderson was gone. Captain Morrison was grounded. But the system that had protected them for so long, that was still there. And Michelle had just declared war on it. The fight for real change was only beginning. The Boeing 737 leveled off at 37,000 feet, the familiar sensation of cruising altitude settling over the cabin. Outside Michelle's window, the Georgia landscape had given way to the patchwork farms of Alabama, then Mississippi. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and green. Captain Patricia Hall's voice came over the intercom, professional and warm. "Good morning, everyone. This is your captain speaking. We're now at our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. Weather looks clear all the way to Los Angeles, and we're expecting an on-time arrival despite our delayed departure. Flight attendants, you're free to begin service." Michelle watched the new flight crew move through the cabin with a professionalism that should have been standard, but now felt remarkable after what had just happened. James worked alongside two other attendants who'd been called in to replace Carol. Both looked nervous, clearly aware of what had occurred during boarding. The replacement lead flight attendant was a Latina woman in her 40s named Sophia Martinez. She approached Michelle's seat with careful respect. "Miss Williams, can I get you anything? Coffee? Juice? Water?" "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you. Black, no sugar." Sophia nodded and returned moments later with the coffee in a real ceramic cup, not the usual plastic. "Ma'am, I just want to say, what you did back there, standing up for yourself like that, my daughter needs to see that. She's 12, and she's already experiencing people treating her differently because of how she looks. Thank you for showing her that we don't have to accept it." Michelle felt the weight of those words. This wasn't just about one incident. It was about every person who'd ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. "Your daughter is lucky to have you," Michelle said. "And Sophia, I'm going to be making changes, real changes. I need honest feedback from crew members like you about what actually happens on these flights. Will you help me with that?" Sophia's eyes widened. "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." As Sophia moved on with the service cart, Robert Chin from seat 1A turned around. "Ms. Williams, I hope I'm not intruding, but I have to ask. You said you've been doing this for 6 months, flying undercover on your own airline. That's extraordinary." "It was necessary," Michelle replied. "I was getting reports from passengers about discrimination, but every time we investigated, crew members denied it or explained it away. Management wanted to believe our training was working, that our policies were being followed. I needed to see for myself." "And what did you see?" Michelle looked out the window, gathering her thoughts. "I saw that good intentions aren't enough. I saw that diversity training modules that people click through once a year don't change ingrained biases. I saw that when there are no consequences for bad behavior, the behavior continues. And I saw that the passengers who are most affected, Black passengers, Latino passengers, passengers who don't look like they belong in premium cabins, they just accept it because fighting back is exhausting and usually pointless." "Until today," Robert said. "Until today," Michelle agreed. "But one dramatic confrontation doesn't fix a broken system. That's the easy part. The hard part starts when we land." Dorothy Jenkins had been listening from row 3. "Baby, can I ask you something? What made you start this airline in the first place?" Michelle smiled, remembering. "I was working as a management consultant, flying constantly for work. And I noticed the same patterns Carol showed today. The assumptions, the extra scrutiny, the subtle and not so subtle ways that passengers of color were treated differently. One day, I was on a flight where a Black teenager was accused of stealing headphones that he'd actually purchased. Security was called. He was humiliated in front of everyone. And I thought, someone needs to build an airline that actually lives its values. So I did. 12 years ago, Dorothy said. I remember when Skyrise launched. Everyone said you'd fail within a year. A Black woman starting an airline with no aviation background, no family money, just determination and bank loans. They were almost right, Michelle admitted. The first 3 years were brutal. We nearly went bankrupt twice. But we survived, and we grew. And somewhere along the way, in the chaos of expansion and operations and trying to compete with the major carriers, I lost sight of why I started this. I got caught up in the business of running an airline and forgot about the mission of changing airline culture. And now, William Jenkins asked. Now I remember, Michelle said firmly. What happened today with Carol, that wasn't an anomaly. That was a symptom of a deeper problem. And I'm going to fix it, even if it means burning down everything I've built and starting over. The man across the aisle, a middle-aged Black businessman who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Miss Williams, I fly Skyrise at least twice a month. I've had my own incidents, never as extreme as what happened to you today, but the looks, the questions, the way crew members watch me more carefully than they watch white passengers. I stopped complaining because nothing ever changed. "What's your name?" Michelle asked. "Marcus Thompson. I work in tech sales." "Marcus, I'm going to give you my direct email. I want to hear about every incident, every single one. And I want you to tell other passengers of color to do the same. I'm creating a direct reporting system that bypasses the usual customer service channels and comes straight to my office." She pulled out a business card and wrote her personal email on the back. "I mean it. Every incident matters." Marcus took the card, looking stunned. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Sophia returned with the service card. "Miss Williams, we're about to serve breakfast. Would you like the omelet or the fruit plate?" "The omelet, please. Thank you, Sophia." As Sophia prepared the meal, her hands were shaking slightly. Michelle noticed. "Sophia, are you okay?" Sophia glanced around, then leaned in and spoke quietly. "Ma'am, I need to tell you something. Carol Henderson, what she did to you wasn't new. I've worked several flights with her over the past 2 years. I've seen her treat Black passengers, Latino passengers, Asian passengers differently. She's very careful about it, never does it when management is watching, never in a way that leaves clear evidence. But we all knew. Why didn't anyone report it?" Sophia's expression was pained. "Some did. I did. 3 times. Each time it went to her supervisor, who happened to be her friend. Each time it was dismissed as a misunderstanding or a cultural difference or just Carol's direct communication style. After the 3rd time, her supervisor pulled me aside and suggested I was the one with the problem, that I was too sensitive about racial issues." Michelle felt her jaw tighten. "Who was the supervisor?" "Robert Walsh. He's the regional operations manager for the Southeast." Michelle made a mental note. Robert Walsh would be having a very uncomfortable conversation with HR very soon. "Sophia, thank you for telling me. And I'm sorry you weren't heard the 1st time, or the 2nd, or the 3rd. That ends now." As the flight continued westward, Michelle's phone began buzzing with messages. The videos from the airport had indeed gone viral. Her PR team was in crisis mode. Her board of directors was demanding an emergency meeting. News outlets were requesting interviews. One text stood out, from her best friend and college roommate, Keisha. "Girl, you just became a hero to every Black woman who's ever been told she doesn't belong somewhere. But you know the backlash is coming, right?" Michelle did know. She'd seen this pattern before. First would come the praise. The articles celebrating her courage, the social media support, the think pieces about discrimination in air travel. Then would come the backlash. The people who'd say she was playing the race card, that Carol had just been doing her job, that Michelle had manufactured the whole incident for attention. The flight to Los Angeles would take about 4 hours. Michelle spent most of it working on her laptop, drafting the internal memo that would go out to all SkyRise employees the moment they landed. She was also reviewing personnel files, looking at complaint patterns, identifying other employees who'd been protected despite problematic behavior. James approached during a lull in the service. "Miss Williams, can I ask you something?" "Of course, James." "What happens to those of us who were on that crew? I mean, I didn't do what Carol did, but I was there. I worked with her. Does that make me complicit?" Michelle considered the question carefully. "James, you tried to intervene. I saw that. You questioned Carol's judgment. That took courage, especially given the power dynamics with a senior flight attendant and a captain backing her up. But I want you to think about something. How many other flights have you worked with Carol where something similar happened and you didn't speak up?" James looked down. "A few. Maybe more than a few. I always told myself it wasn't my place to contradict her. She had seniority. She knew the rules better than me." "And that's exactly how discrimination persists," Michelle said gently. "Not because of the Carols of the world, they're the symptom, but because of the good people who see something wrong and convince themselves it's not their responsibility to speak up. I'm not blaming you, James. I'm asking you to be better going forward. All of us have to be better." "I will be," James said firmly. "I promise." 2 hours into the flight, Captain Patricia Hall's voice came over the intercom again. Folks, this is your captain. We're going to be experiencing some light turbulence as we cross into New Mexico. Nothing to worry about, just some afternoon thermals. Flight attendants, please take your seats for a few minutes. The turbulence was indeed mild, just enough to make the coffee in Michelle's cup ripple slightly. But it reminded her of something her father had told her years ago, when she'd first announced her plan to start an airline. Her father had been a mechanic, worked with his hands his whole life, never flew anywhere. But he'd looked at her business plan and said, "Baby, running a business is like flying through turbulence. You can't avoid it. You can only decide how you're going to handle it. You can panic and lose control, or you can stay steady and trust that you'll get through to the other side." She was about to hit the worst turbulence of her career. The videos going viral were just the beginning. There would be lawsuits. Carol would sue for wrongful termination, claiming she'd been made an example of unfairly. Captain Morrison might sue as well. There would be employee unrest with people taking sides. There would be pressure from the board to contain the damage, to issue carefully worded statements that said nothing. But Michelle wasn't interested in containing damage. She was interested in fixing what was broken. Her phone buzzed with a call from Gerald Stevens, her board chair. She answered. "Michelle, what the hell happened in Atlanta?" "Exactly what I told you would happen 6 months ago when I proposed going undercover. I found the discrimination I suspected existed."
By getting yourself thrown off your own plane? This is going to be a PR nightmare. Gerald, the nightmare is that this has been happening for years and we didn't know about it. Or we knew and didn't want to look too closely. Today, we looked, and we're going to keep looking until we fix it. The board is very concerned about the optics. I don't care about optics. I care about the reality that black passengers on my airline are being treated like criminals. The board should be concerned about that. There was a long pause. "Michelle, you know I support you, but you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. Carol Henderson's lawyer has already contacted us. They're claiming she was following standard verification procedures and that you're using your position to retaliate against her for doing her job." Let them claim it. I have 6 months of documented evidence showing a pattern of discriminatory behavior. I have video of today's incident from multiple angles. I have witnesses. They have a fired flight attendant who told a black woman she didn't belong in first class. Still, litigation is expensive. The board wants to consider settling quietly. No settlements, no quiet resolutions. We fight this publicly and we win publicly, because every settlement with a confidentiality clause is another way of hiding the problem instead of fixing it. Gerald sighed. "You're sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything." "Then I've got your back. But Michelle, be ready. This is going to test everything you've built." After she hung up, Michelle looked out the window. They were over the southwest now, the landscape below a tapestry of desert browns and reds. Somewhere down there were people going about their lives, unaware that a video of a confrontation at 35,000 feet was reshaping conversations about race, class, and dignity. Dorothy Jenkins appeared beside her seat. "Honey, I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to give you something before we land." She handed Michelle a small card with elegant script. "That's my granddaughter's information. She's graduating from UCLA with a degree in business. She wants to work in aviation. I'd be honored if you'd consider meeting with her." Michelle took the card. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'd be honored to meet her. Have her email me directly." She's going to be over the moon. You know what she said when she decided to study business? She said, "Grandma, if Michelle Williams can build an airline, I can do anything." Michelle felt tears prick her eyes. Your granddaughter is going to do amazing things. As they began their descent into Los Angeles, the California coastline coming into view, Michelle prepared herself for what came next. The landing, the media waiting at the gate, because of course they'd be there, the statement she'd have to make, the meeting she'd have to take, the company she'd have to rebuild. But right now, in this moment, 37,000 feet above the earth she'd fought so hard to rise above, Michelle Williams allowed herself to feel something she hadn't let herself feel in 6 months of undercover flights. Hope. Hope that change was possible. Hope that one moment of courage could spark a movement. Hope that the airline she'd built from nothing could become the airline she'd always dreamed it could be. The landing gear deployed with its familiar thunk. The ground rose up to meet them, and Michelle Williams prepared to face whatever came next. The wheels of Flight 418 touched down on LAX's runway with barely a bounce. Captain Patricia Hall's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. Local time is 10:47 a.m. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we've reached the gate and the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. On behalf of the entire crew, thank you for flying Skyrise Airlines." Michelle looked out the window as the aircraft taxied toward the terminal. She could already see news vans parked near the gate area, satellite dishes extended. Security personnel in yellow vests were establishing a perimeter. This wasn't going to be a quiet arrival. Her phone had been on airplane mode during the flight, but now notifications flooded in. Hundreds of messages, thousands of social media mentions. Her name was trending nationally. The hashtag #SeatWhileBlack had emerged and was being shared by celebrities, politicians, activists. One message stood out, from her mother. "Baby, I'm proud of you, but I'm also worried. Be careful. Not everyone is going to celebrate what you did today." Michelle typed back quickly, "I know, Mama. I love you." The aircraft reached the gate. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers began standing, gathering their belongings, but many were looking at Michelle, some approaching to shake her hand or thank her. A young black girl, maybe 9 years old, traveling with her mother, came up shyly. "Are you the lady from the videos?" "I am," Michelle said gently. "My mom says you're a hero." Michelle knelt down to the girl's eye level. "You know what real heroes do? They stand up for what's right even when it's scary. And you can be a hero too, anytime you see something wrong and you speak up about it, okay?" The girl nodded solemnly, then hugged Michelle quickly before her mother ushered her forward. Dorothy and William Jenkins stopped at Michelle's row. "We're not going to keep you, but we wanted to say this has been the most meaningful flight of our lives. What you started today, it's going to ripple out in ways you can't even imagine yet." "Thank you both for your courage too," Michelle said. "It matters that you spoke up." As first class emptied, Sophia Martinez approached. "Miss Williams, there are a lot of reporters out there. Security is asking if you want to exit through a different door." "No," Michelle said firmly. "I'll go through the main gate. I'm not hiding." She gathered her small bag and walked down the aisle. At the aircraft door, Captain Patricia Hall was waiting. "That was an honor to fly, ma'am. Whatever you need going forward, I'm here." "Thank you, Patricia. I'm going to need good people like you in the days ahead." Michelle stepped off the aircraft into the jet bridge. At the end, near the gate, she could see the crowd, reporters with cameras, microphones extended, security trying to maintain order. She took a deep breath and walked forward. The moment she emerged into the gate area, the cameras erupted. Flashes, shouted questions, microphones thrust toward her face. "Ms. Williams, how does it feel to be removed from your own airline? Was this a publicity stunt? Are you going to sue Carol Henderson? What message are you sending to other airlines?" Michelle raised her hand and surprisingly, the crowd quieted. She spoke clearly, projecting her voice. "I'm going to make one statement, and then I need to get to my office to continue the work that started in Atlanta this morning. What happened on Flight 418 was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a systemic problem, not just at Skyrise Airlines, but throughout the aviation industry and beyond. Black passengers, passengers of color, are routinely treated with suspicion, subjected to extra scrutiny, and made to feel they don't belong in spaces they've paid for and earned. I founded Skyrise to change that culture. Today, I learned that good intentions aren't enough. Real change requires accountability. Carol Henderson is no longer employed by Skyrise Airlines. Captain David Morrison is grounded pending investigation. And we are launching a comprehensive review of our policies, training, and culture. This is just the beginning. Thank you. She walked through the crowd without taking questions, security clearing a path. Behind her, she could hear reporters still shouting questions, but she didn't stop. She had work to do. Skyrise's corporate headquarters was in El Segundo, a short drive from Lax. Michelle arrived to find the parking lot filled with news vans and her employees standing in clusters, talking in hushed voices. Some looked supportive, others looked worried. All of them looked shocked. Her executive assistant, Jennifer, met her at the private entrance. "Miss Williams, the entire executive team is waiting in the boardroom. Legal is there, HR is there, and Gerald called 3 more times." "Thank you, Jennifer. Give me 5 minutes in my office first." Michelle's corner office overlooked the runways of LA. She could see her planes taking off and landing, the teal stripe of Skyrise livery distinctive against the sky. She'd fought so hard to build this, and now she was about to shake it to its foundations. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The internal memo she'd drafted on the flight needed one final read before she sent it company-wide. To all Skyrise Airlines employees. From Michelle Williams, CEO. Subject, a moment of truth. Today, I experienced firsthand the discrimination that too many of our passengers face. I was told I didn't belong in first class. I was questioned, suspected, and threatened with removal, all because of the color of my skin. This happened on my own airline, the airline I built to be different, the airline where we claim to value every passenger equally. I was wrong to think that policies and training programs alone could change culture. Culture changes through accountability. Starting today, 1. Every complaint of discrimination will be investigated by an independent third party, not internal management. 2. Any employee found to have engaged in discriminatory behavior will be terminated regardless of seniority. 3. All crew members will undergo mandatory anti-bias training, not online modules, but in-person workshops with real accountability. 4. We are establishing a passenger advisory board made up entirely of people of color to review our policies and procedures. 5. I will personally review every discrimination complaint that comes through our system. This will be difficult. Change always is. But the alternative, continuing to allow passengers to be treated as I was treated today, is unacceptable. If you cannot commit to treating every passenger with dignity and respect regardless of their race, religion, or appearance, then Skyrise is not the right place for you. We are better than what happened today. Now we have to prove it. Michelle clicked send. The memo went out to 8,247 employees simultaneously. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and walked to the boardroom. The entire executive team was there, along with the head of legal, the head of HR, and the board chair, Gerald Stevens. They all stood when she entered. "Sit down," Michelle said. "We have a lot of work to do." For the next 3 hours, they discussed the immediate response, legal strategy for the inevitable lawsuits, PR messaging, operational changes, personnel reviews. Michelle was firm on every point. No settlements with confidentiality clauses, no quiet resolutions, no protecting employees who'd engaged in discriminatory behavior. Robert Walsh, the regional operations manager who dismissed Sophia's complaints about Carol, was fired on the spot when his personnel file was reviewed. 2 other supervisors who'd buried similar complaints were placed on immediate leave pending investigation. The head of training was given 30 days to completely overhaul the diversity and inclusion program or be replaced. By the time the meeting ended, it was after 7 p.m. Michelle was exhausted but energized. This was what real leadership looked like. Not the comfortable executive suite decisions, but the hard, painful work of confronting failures and demanding better. Robert Walsh, the regional operations manager who dismissed Sophia's complaints about Carol, was fired on the spot when his personnel file was reviewed. 2 other supervisors who'd buried similar complaints were placed on immediate leave pending investigation.
The head of training was given 30 days to completely overhaul the diversity and inclusion program or be replaced. By the time the meeting ended, it was after 7 p.m. Michelle was exhausted, but energized. This was what real leadership looked like. Not the comfortable executive suite decisions, but the hard, painful work of confronting failures and demanding better.
Michelle stood at the same gate at LAX where Captain Patricia Hall now regularly flew. She was boarding a flight to Atlanta, full circle from where this journey had begun. So much had changed in 6 months. The lawsuits from Carol Henderson and Captain Morrison had been settled, but not quietly. Both had been required to participate in public statements acknowledging their discriminatory behavior as part of the settlement. Carol had issued a tearful apology video that went viral. Morrison had entered a rehabilitation program for bias and was now working with a nonprofit training pilots on crew resource management and equality. Skyrise had become the first airline to implement an independent discrimination reporting system. Complaints had initially surged, not because discrimination had increased, but because passengers finally believed they'd be heard. Then, gradually, complaints had begun to decrease as culture actually changed. The company had lost some employees who couldn't or wouldn't adapt to the new standards, but they'd gained others, talented people of color who'd never considered working for an airline before because they'd experienced too much discrimination as passengers. Revenue had briefly dipped during the controversy, but then surged as passengers, particularly passengers of color, actively chose Skyrise because they knew they'd be treated with dignity. And Michelle had become a reluctant public figure, speaking at conferences, testifying before Congress about discrimination in transportation, inspiring countless people who'd felt powerless in the face of everyday racism. But today, she was just a passenger again, flying to Atlanta for a speaking engagement at Spelman College, her alma mater. She boarded the aircraft, and the flight attendant who greeted her was James, the same James from that fateful flight 6 months ago. He'd been promoted to lead flight attendant and had become one of the company's most vocal advocates for equality. "Welcome aboard, Miss Williams," James said with a genuine smile. "Thank you, James. How's the crew today?" "Excellent. We've got a great team, and we've all been through the new training. It makes a difference." Michelle took her seat, 2A again by coincidence, and looked around the cabin. It was full of diverse passengers, all settling in, all belonging. An elderly white woman in 1C caught her eye and smiled. "You're her, aren't you? The CEO who got kicked off her own plane?" "I am," Michelle acknowledged. "My grandson is black, mixed race. He's terrified of flying because of how he gets treated. But last month, he flew Skyrise for the first time, and he called me crying, happy tears, because everyone treated him like he mattered. So thank you. You changed his life." Michelle felt the familiar tightness in her throat. "Thank you for telling me that. That's why we did this." As the flight prepared for departure, Michelle's phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy Jenkins, the elderly woman who'd stood up for her that day in Atlanta. "My granddaughter just got hired as a Skyrise management trainee. She starts next month. Thank you for giving her a place where she can truly belong."
Michelle typed back, "Tell her welcome to the family. We're lucky to have her." The engines powered up. The aircraft pushed back from the gate. And as they lifted into the Los Angeles sky, Michelle Williams looked out the window at the city below and thought about how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. The fight for equality wasn't won with one confrontation. It was won day by day, flight by flight, one dignified interaction at a time. And Skyrise Airlines was finally living up to its name, rising above the low expectations of an industry that had accepted discrimination as normal. Rising towards something better. This is a fictional story, but the discrimination it depicts is real. Every day, people of color face assumptions, suspicion, and disrespect in spaces they've earned the right to occupy. The only difference is that most of them aren't CEOs who can fire the people who mistreat them. Real change happens when people in power use that power to demand better, when witnesses speak up, when companies prioritize dignity over profit, when we all refuse to accept that discrimination is just how things are. Michelle Williams is fictional, but her courage can be real in each of us.